All right, we're back, and this is video 4, and we're gonna start talking about some things on the extremes of intelligence. And basically, again, here you have a bell curve, and what we're talking about is the more or less the I guess you could say the 5%, and you cut that in half because half of the 5% would be above 130 and half of it would be below 70. So we're talking about that 5% at the extremes, okay? And so 2%, 130, if you have a 130 or above IQ, you're in the 2% range. Now obviously if you're at 145, you're at an even, just a point, I think it was a 0.7 or something like that, percent of the population is at a 145 or greater. Okay, and then the same is true for mental retardation. So just keep that in mind, that is how that works. If you understand how the bell curve breaks down, you're understanding the standard deviations, it makes sense. If you don't, again, make sure you come ask me about that. So you can see here that they go from the average, the mean intelligence score is 100. Then it goes to 115, and then it goes to 130, and then 145 in that direction. And it goes down by 15 as well. Okay. So here we're going to talk about mental retardation. Today, it's gotten much better for those who are considered mentally retarded. I don't know what the politically correct term is, but those who are needing help. When I look at the chart there in the book, I have it up here on the screen. You have levels of mental retardation, which I mean, I know when I was your age, I didn't even know that. I had no idea. But basically, if you are mildly mentally retarded, you have an IQ of between 50 and 70, and they may learn academic skills up to the 6th grade level. Adults may, with assistance, achieve self-supporting social and vocational skills, so they may actually be able to live somewhat on their own. And definitely, I would say these are, the individuals who might be at a job like I think of the Publix baggers sometimes. Some of them might be there. So, and this percentage here that they have, I'm trying to show you there, that's saying that of all the people who are mentally retarded, 85% fall within mildly retarded. So it's the bulk of those that are considered mentally retarded. Then you get into moderately mentally retarded, and they have an IQ of between 35 and 50, and only 10% of the handicapped population falls in there. And they may progress to 2nd grade level academically, so not very high. And again, they may have some things that they can do in workshops with some good supervision that allow them to function as close to an adult as they can possibly get. So, and then you get severe, which is a 20 to 35 IQ, a very small percentage there, 3 to 4%. And then we're talking about trying to get them to talk, to be able to use language. Perform simple work tasks under close supervision, but obviously they're not probably going to be high enough functioning to be able to help a business in any way. They're basically just going to be watched and taken care of. And you could imagine how draining that could be on a family that chooses to do that by themselves. And then profound is below 20, and you're talking just a very, very small percentage of those who are handicapped, and they may never learn their letters, numbers, none of it. It may never come. It may just be nothing but just trying to keep them from, just just doing silly things to harm themselves or just on accident, things like that. I don't mean on purpose, but it's a very, very tough level of mental retardation to deal with. But you have levels, so I just want to make sure we got that clear. Now, high intelligence. A lot of people think that when you get to these higher levels of intelligence, people are all dysfunctional. Like I'm always joking about Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory, and remember, it's a comedy, it's a TV, it's television world, it's Hollywood. He is obviously very high functioning. He has a job and so on and so forth. But he is what people think of as the elite smart, just can't like carry conversation with people, and that's just absolutely not the least bit true. Look at Leonard on the show. Got to remember, all four of those main characters are considered geniuses in the sense that they're brilliant at what they do. They're working at a research facility that's one of the best in the world. And you would say Leonard on the show is much more normal. He can definitely hold conversations. He's very well adjusted, you know, and he's happy in his lifestyle. So that's more of the world that you would be looking at if somebody of very high intelligence. Now, what they may find enjoyable in their leisure time is completely different than somebody who is, you know, more normal intelligence, you know, who is maybe a plumber or something. Obviously, they're going to differ on what they do to relax, but that neither here nor there. Anyway, those with high intelligence obviously are able to move into many more possible fields than those who have average intelligence. They tend to be bored faster, so they tend to want something that's going to constantly challenge them intellectually. It's important to understand that several of you have come to me trying to understand the correlation between IQ and why is it this big deal and being labeled, and you gotta really, it's a number, okay? It is a number, and it's supposed to be used for certain things, but you got, again, I think I've said this before, government institutions want to organize the system, and they have, for whatever reason, grabbed this number and said this is a good way to do it. It's a correlational number. It indicates how well you may do if you have a higher intelligence score, IQ, in academic areas. It does correlate well in the world of academia. It does not correlate that well in the world of, I guess you could say, success in life or money. I don't know why money equals success, but for some reason everybody equates that. But you got to remember, people of high intelligence may or may not go into a field that may pay them well. It's not a requirement. You have people who are extremely smart, I mean brilliant. They go into education because they want to research. They want to be in the world of cutting edge technology and figuring out what's the new boundary, and whether it's computers, space, engineering. But those are not jobs that people tend to think of as paid, you know, you don't become rich that way. And they don't care because that's not why they're doing it. Okay, their motivation isn't always about making money. So, you know, when you look at like a Bill Gates, I'm sure the man has a very high IQ. I don't know what it is. But he also happened to be a very good businessman. One of the things that he was interested in, he had come up with an idea about computers, which he did, but he was also interested in marketing it and doing the business side of it, and he was superb at it. One of the best in the world ever. Well, by and large, you know, he could have taken that intelligence just the same, and you know, he went to Harvard. He could have stayed at Harvard and just become a researcher and just research stuff. So keep that in mind, that many with high intelligence do the same thing. So it's not necessarily, there's no correlation with how much money you're going to make in your life, but perhaps how far you go academically, and you know, your ability to choose your misery, I guess, would be better to have a high intelligence. Now we're going to talk about genetic and environmental influences on intelligence. This is probably the biggest debate, okay? And again, it's just like chapter 3, nature versus nurture. It's a constant theme throughout the book. And so it says, no other topic in psychology is so passionately followed as the one that asked the question, is intelligence due to genetics or environment? And there is a huge debate, and you can say yes to both, okay? Let's work our way through here. Big thing we do to determine these things is look at twins. That is the world that we love to evaluate genetics on, because twins, especially identical twins, are absolutely 100% identical genetically, okay? So when you start to see twins who have been separated at birth and they're in different environments, what a great way to study how much environment affects IQ versus genetics, okay? And so here you can see that the scores correlate strongest with identical twins reared together, and then you get into identical, then it's a little bit weaker with identical twins reared apart, and then fraternal, and then just siblings, and then unrelated individuals in society that are reared together. Okay, so there's obviously a very strong connection between genetics does play a role in sort of being able to max out your intelligence quotient. You know, if you probably come, if you're the child of two, you know, Ivy League educated individuals, you're probably going to have a much higher IQ than somebody who comes from possibly, you know, some parents that are just scraping, that have not been, let's not put it socioeconomic, let's say just weren't educated and don't put a lot of emphasis on education. That's just the way it tends to work out as far as the genetics go. All right, now let's get into adoption studies. Adopted children show a marginal correlation in verbal ability to their adopted parents. So what they have shown here is adopted kids will start off, their IQ can be affected by their adoptive parents for a period of time. But eventually as they get older, that correlation dies out, and the kids, usually their natural inclination for their IQ will start to express itself, and if they happen to be from a background that they should have a higher IQ than their adoptive parents, then they will, or I guess lower, then they will. So it's not so much who your adoptive parents are as much as your genetic parents as far as long-term IQ. So that's a huge argument for genetics being largely responsible for your IQ. Okay, but there are other arguments. Environmental influences. Okay, so what we see here is other twin studies. Fraternal twins raised together tend to show similarity in intelligence scores. So fraternal, they're not identical. Okay. So that would make sense. So that's their environment. So they're fraternal. They're not identical, but if they're raised together, they tend to show similar intelligence scores. Then you have identical twins raised apart show slightly less similarity in their intelligence scores, which is an indication that their environment does have a factor in the process. Now, that word slightly less, it can get you to feel that maybe it's not as big an influence as perhaps genetics, and that may be so. But again, there's an argument to be made that it's both of them that influence our IQ. They have found that early intervention does tend to help. Early neglect from caregivers leads children to develop a lack of personal control over their environment, and it impoverishes their intelligence. Okay, and I've told you before about the Romanian orphans with minimal human interaction are delayed in their development. So, you know, your environment can definitely cause a slowdown if you are meant to be at a certain level, perhaps IQ, and you have a very severe background where you were not emotionally, intellectually stimulated or cared for. It can cause a problem. The key thing to remember here is at no point, we're human beings. We adapt. We're extremely resilient beings, and there have been many cases of people overcoming just incredible, horrible stories to pursue, you know, the success in their lives. You know, and I'm sure their intelligence has to have been a part of that, and that it allowed them to overcome their situation. Schooling is an experience that pays dividends, which is reflected in intelligence scores. Increased schooling correlates with higher intelligence scores. By and large, a lot of the intelligence tests measure a lot of school stuff. Okay, intelligence tests are not necessarily designed to measure, I guess you could say, street smarts, if you want to say that, or you know, interpersonal smarts, things like that. It's just, they're not designed for that. So of course, the higher your IQ, the better your schooling. The more you're schooling, the better your IQ. They correlate, okay? So just keep that in mind. Okay, how about group differences in intelligence test scores? Why do they differ in intelligence? How can we make sense of these differences? And that's the question that a lot of people are wondering. And we're going to get into this term heritability. Got to understand this topic. I guarantee you it'll be a question on the AP exam because I know everybody gets confused over it. Okay, so understand heritability. And if you don't get it, come talk to me. But I'm going to keep trying to explain it. Okay, so to discuss this issue, we begin with distributing two disturbing but agreed upon facts. Racial groups differ in their average intelligence scores, okay? Roughly, African Americans score 10 to 15 points lower on average than white Americans. Okay, and so there's a difference there. And the question is, why? And then two, high-scoring people are more likely to attain high levels of education and income. And then the question is, why? Okay, again, I think that one's a little bit easier to answer in that it's a test that is evaluating people's ability to survive, more or less, in the world of academia and continue on in education. So that kind of makes sense. So here we go with racial group. Okay, if we look at racial differences, white Americans score higher in average intelligence than black Americans. Okay, European New Zealanders score higher than native New Zealanders. Okay. All right, let's get into heritability. Let's explain this here. There's so many different ways to do this, but this picture you see in the book, okay, you see this. What we're talking about here is the environment. How much of you, or any of us, is inherited, in other words, genetic, versus our environment, okay? So if you look at the seeds in this picture, this is the genetics, okay? And there are differences between the seeds, as we know. Not everybody is the same. If you have a brother or sister, you're not genetically identical, but you're from the same family, and therefore you are similar enough, okay, that you would say genetically you're pretty much from the same background, okay? Now, if you take these seeds and you put one of them in poor soil, the same seeds, half of the packet goes in poor soil pot and half of it goes into a fertile soil pot, what you have there, the difference between these two groups overall, okay, would be environment, okay? The difference between the two groups is environment. Now, the differences between the groups within the pot, as you see here, this flower is taller than this flower. That difference between these two, they're coming from the same soil, is genetics. And the same can be true here. Here you have a flower that's taller than this flower, okay? And that, again, the difference between these two is genetics. The difference between this flower and this flower, the two tallest in each pot, would be environment. And that is where you get into your heritability question, okay? And that is a tough question to answer, and there's always that debate over what is the heritability of the situation. So, some reasons why environment affects intelligence. Races are remarkably alike genetically, okay? Race is a social category. Asian students outperform North American students on math achievement and aptitude tests, okay? Today's better prepared populations would outperform populations in the 1930s on intelligence tests, okay? And white and black infants tend to score equally well on tests predicting future intelligence. Okay? Different ethnic groups have experienced periods of remarkable achievement in different eras. Okay? So here you have all these environmental factors, okay, that could be causing a difference between, in our case, the races in our country. I don't think it has a whole lot to do with, like, I mean, you get in that question, is one race smarter than the other? No, I don't think. I think one individual may be smarter than another individual, but even trying to do that with any individual, trying to compare that, I think is just pointless in ways, because what someone is good at intelligence-wise, that's great. That may be valued by society today, and in 200 years, it's not. So it just, you have to take it with a grain of salt again, okay? Where am I? Did I go? Oh, okay, I did go there. All right, so there are 7 ways in which males and females differ in various abilities. Now we got the male-female thing. Now we got gender. Girls are better spellers, okay? Girls are verbally fluent and have large vocabularies. They tend to talk sooner than boys do, and we already learned that. Girls are better at locating objects. Yep. Girls are more sensitive to touch, taste, and color. What? Okay. Sometimes I wonder if that's why girls like flowers so much. It's just a curiosity of mine, because and to me flowers are, you know, nice to look at briefly for a moment, and I don't care to smell them at all. Okay. Boys outnumber girls in counts of underachievement. Ooh. Okay. Boys outperform girls at math problem solving, but underperform at math computation. So within the math world, there is a difference there, some strengths and weaknesses between girls and guys. And women detect emotions more easily than men do. Okay, and I would go with that definitely. Okay, that's just definitely something I've seen over my lifetime. Okay, so the question has to be asked. Okay, are aptitude tests necessarily biased in the sense that they are sensitive to performance differences caused by cultural differences? Yeah. I think cultural difference. I think if you come from a background, you know, perhaps, you know, if education in your community is absolutely something that is just not a part of the community psyche, you're going to be swimming upstream, I guess you could say, against a current when you're taking an IQ test that is evaluating academic achievement, and it's difficult. It's a difficult problem. There's definitely a bias. Now, that's not to say that people can't rise above their situation and can change that, okay? However, aptitude tests are not biased in the sense that they accurately predict performance of one group over the other. Absolutely, okay? They are biased. Here's another example. In the world of comparing white and black populations in America, I'd say there's definitely a bias in how they were constructed, these tests. But as far as white people who score higher on IQ tests tend to do better academically than white people who don't score as high? Yes. Within the black community, do black people who score higher on IQ tests tend to do better academically than other black people who don't score as high? Yes. So in that sense, it does indicate, it does correlate well within groups, okay, if that makes sense. Now we get into stereotype threat. Last thing, last slide, so don't worry. Self-confirming concern that one will be evaluated based on a negative stereotype, and that is true. It is out there. Probably those of us, white males, is probably the least able to understand this, because by and large, we're the ones that tend to are accused of stereotyping everyone. But they've actually found that you take somebody and you put them into a testing room, and let's say that's all filled with boys, and they take a female and put them in there, that's going to cause many times unease for the female, because there's this stereotype that females don't do as well on, let's say, math tests, you know, higher math levels than males. That stereotype threat can actually cause the girl to not do as well because she's stressing out over it. Okay, and the same could be true for racial differences. Okay, so just keep in mind, stereotype threat is a real thing. Okay, it appears in some instances in intelligence testing among African Americans and among others, women of all colors. So it is a real thing. It is the attempt at this point to change. They make sure that there's a lot more thought going into allowing creating ways in which people don't feel threatened during periods of testing and or just plain learning. Okay. I mean, it might be something where I'm not going to end it there because I can go on and on and on. Please ask me questions if you don't understand anything. Good luck. Talk to you soon.